Hello everyone, this is our review of our Mesopotamia reflection activities. So the first reflection activity was to draw a map of the ancient Near East, which include the following items. I'm not going to go through them all, but everyone did, I thought, a very good job here, kind of getting the basic idea of the geography, the importance of the rivers, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, the important waterways such as the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and of course the deserts, the mountains, and some of the key locations as well. So overall, very good job there. If you lost a few points, it was only for perhaps not including one location or another that was listed here. But for the most part, everyone did a very good job there. Alright, moving on to question number 2. We'll describe the development of kingship and how it first arose in Mesopotamia. What are some of the possible reasons that kingship became the predominant political organization? I thought that overall the class did a very good job in this question as well, and really kind of described the transition that as societies became more complex, competition between cities rose, and populations continued to increase and become larger and larger, that there seemed to be more pressure put on what we believe to be kind of the original forms of government in a lot of these cities. Forms of government like town assemblies, government that was controlled by religious organizations, by the temples, and that as time went on and competition and warfare increased, that there was this process of individuals being appointed as kind of military leaders, and that with warfare occurring more and more frequently, that throughout time these kind of war leaders were able to begin securing more and more power for themselves, and was able to start institutionalizing their position not just as a temporary leader but as a full-time position. And importantly, a key factor of this was kind of a combination of the idea of kingship into religion and into kind of the religious philosophies, so that essentially they were able to transfer some of that power that had been held in the hands of priests or temple administrators and so forth to themselves, and sort of made themselves the intermediaries between the gods and the rest of society. And this is kind of a two-way street. It's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario, because we also, during this time period, see a religious hierarchy that starts resembling human societies. We start seeing more anthropomorphic gods, for example, gods that have a society of their own that's modeling the more complex human societies. Remember when we were talking about the Paleolithic time period and a lot of those early agriculturalist societies, the predominant religious views seem to have been a type of animism or ancestor worship. And as time went on and the societies became larger and more complex, there was a shift to these larger anthropomorphic, usually kind of nature gods. You can see the gods, and we're talking about this a little bit later when we were talking about the hymn to Inanna as well, that the gods are fulfilling specific roles in regards to how people are now living, in regards to agriculture in particular. And that this is becoming a increasing factor in the way these new kings are justifying their roles, that they need to be the primary one to fulfill the God's will and make sure that that is being fulfilled on earth, and that is now kind of a religious function of them existing, not just a military function. So trying to find ways, even when there is not warfare, that they're still fulfilling kind of these important roles for society, on top of just kind of organizing and running and implementing whatever government system that they're implementing as well. And certainly it's not a great shock that military rulers and military leaders are able to do this, because if they're successful in battle, they get the fighting people of the city more or less on their side. It's pretty hard to say no at that point in time, and really kind of took that power away from these town assemblies and religious institutions. And of course, the key element of all this is that they begin making their positions hereditary, meaning that they're passing it down from one generation to another. So it's not just one strong military ruler who's able to gain some power, it starts becoming an institutionalized practice that is repeated time and time again. And that this is one of the ways that it becomes kind of a long lasting predominant political organization in the area, is that there's enough support from those who are benefiting from the king, his advisors, the kind of upper echelon of society, that they're able to prop that up and keep that going throughout time, particularly the strong tie usually between a king and the military, which makes it very, very difficult to question this as time goes on, and really one of the reasons I think it does become such a prominent political organization. And we're going to see that when you're looking at a broad range of civilizations, but not all of them, but quite a few of them have informed some version of this kind of kingship role. All right, looking at the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the kind of most important literary pieces of information that we have from this time period, and of course one of the most famous as well. So what elements of the story do you see in modern storytelling, and why do you think themes which were developed over 3,000 years ago still have relevancy today? And a lot of people did a really good job sort of pointing out that Gilgamesh can kind of be seen as kind of the first hero archetype, right? Think about modern times, he's kind of like the first Marvel superhero, right? He has these superhero powers. He can, even fight and compete with gods, and he is a very kind of larger than life a heroic figure. So certainly that's something that was popular and was very important to people and societies thousands of years ago, and is still very relevant in our own lives today. But on a more literary note, a lot of people brought up the fact of kind of the poetry element to this, and how that is still influential and powerful today. That there's a definite story progression, that there's character arcs, that there's emphasis on emotion and pathos, about overcoming great odds, about friendship. And that a lot of times it kind of focuses on big questions, kind of what's the meaning of life. The quest for immortality is still brought up and explored in a lot of different genres that we look at today. And the fact that the character kind of learns a lesson at the end and realizes that he can't escape death, and that it is kind of his role to live out as a mortal and just kind of live life as much and enjoy it as much as he can while he's alive, and not worry about immortality. I think a lot of those still kind of ring true to us today. And also, as someone pointed out, this kind of be considered like the first buddy cop movie, where Enkidu and Gilgamesh teaming up to go on these crazy adventures and so forth. So, I think it fulfills a lot of the kind of same literary tones that we hit in action and in drama and in our art, literature, and film that we still produce to this day. So very good reflections there. All right, looking at the number 4, primary focus, looking at the hymn that was recorded as the first piece of creative writing with a known author, and what can it tell us about Mesopotamian religion, society, and culture? So a lot of people did a really good job pointing out that obviously women had an important role within Mesopotamian religion. The fact that this was not only recorded by a priestess who was obviously literate and is taking this form of writing and using it for at least one of the first times that we know of for kind of a creative purpose here, but also that the main subject of it is a female goddess, Inanna, who is both the kind of goddess of love and reproduction and procreation, as well as war, which is kind of a very interesting dual nature. And we'll be talking a little bit more about the impacts that the natural environments has on Mesopotamia and Egypt for next week. But you can definitely see that there's this link between life and death and rebirth here, very present with the Mesopotamians. It's important to note that even though these are important women fulfilling important roles, that Mesopotamia was still a very patriarchal system. Even though women were allowed to fulfill religious functions, they typically were not able to fulfill political functions. Not nearly as much as, for, say, example, Egypt, where you have, for example, female pharaohs and very powerful female leaders that we see occurring there throughout the years. You really don't see the political side of that here in Mesopotamia, but you are seeing them fill important religious roles, and it's very interesting that they have a goddess to fulfill these very diverse roles within their pantheon. Also, back to our conversation earlier, you can really see the impact that agriculture and agricultural lifestyle is now having on the religion of the Mesopotamians, particularly when they start talking about the divine powers that Inanna has, and how she uses that kind of violently. For example, all of the kind of calamities that she is supposedly um, depositing on foreign lands here, you can all look at those as links to agriculture. Depositing venom on foreign lands. Think of sickness and pestilence, right? This idea that now that humans are living with agricultural animals, that there's a lot more sickness being transferred onto them. So this idea that plague can be transferred, and they're linking that to this goddess. That she roars at the earth and no vegetation can stand up to you. This idea of drought, right? That essentially making sure that your crops cannot grow, very, very devastating. And of course, most importantly to Mesopotamia, a flood descending upon those foreign lands. Powerful one of heaven and earth, you are there, Inanna. So flooding, very, very devastating within Mesopotamia. The fact that the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers were very, very unpredictable, and they could flood very catastrophically at any point in time. And completely wipe out, the crops that were supposed to be supporting a particular people for a long period of time. Once your crops get wiped out, you're in a pretty bad situation. So you can see all of these kind of links to the precarious nature of the sedentary agricultural lifestyle is reflected in the powers given to this particular goddess, which I find very, very interesting. So yeah, very good job overall. I thought a lot of people did a really good job breaking this down and finding some of these sort of hidden tidbits. And finally, what are the top 5 aspects of Mesopotamian civilization that we still utilize today, and why do you think these particular items are still important and impactful in our modern world? And once more, a lot of people had some incredibly good answers for this, talking about the prevalence of art and literature, and how our modern world is still reflecting these. Of course, the importance of writing, and how that is, we're a very kind of literary and literate-driven culture today. How that really stems back to this time period. The advancements in science and astronomy, and how much that has only progressed throughout time and continues to make up such an important part of our world. About politics, government, the introduction of laws, the prevalence of warfare and the technology that went along with that, bronze and bronze working, the wheel. Yeah, I thought the class overall did an excellent job kind of explaining how all of these various elements kind of still combine to form sort of a lot of times the bedrock of what we think of as our modern day civilizations. So just like with the Epic of Gilgamesh, you can really see that humans haven't changed all that much in the time period we're talking about. A lot of times they still have the same concerns, the same questions, the same problems, and a lot of times they try to go about solving them in very, very similar ways. Certainly there are differences, but I think just on a surface level looking at this, you can see a lot of those similarities striking through. So hopefully that is the message that everyone has been left with at the end of this week. Thank you all very much for your hard work, and I will talk to everyone moving forward. Alright, let's go ahead and go over our primary source document exercise here, looking at a part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, as well as the preface to Hammurabi's Law Code, and trying to figure out a little bit of the responsibilities and expectations of Mesopotamian kings, the differences between Gilgamesh and Hammurabi and how they're portrayed, and maybe a little bit of what these ancient leaders and how they compare to modern rulers and modern leaders today. So based on these two documents, list some of the responsibilities and expectations of Mesopotamian kings. So I just went through and highlighted a few places here throughout the documents that you kind of see evidence of this popping up. These aren't the only locations, but these are some of the main ones that people use to help answer these questions. And remember, if you do not get the grade you were looking for on the primary source discussions, a big part of it oftentimes is that you weren't bringing in enough of this specific information from the documents. So my reflection videos are going to be kind of a deep dive, going in and showing exactly where in the documents is the information that you could use to answer these questions, so that in the future you'll have a better idea of kind of what I'm looking for and how to go about answering some of these questions. So first of all, this kind of first part here in a number of locations talking about Gilgamesh. They say, he who saw everything in the broad-boned earth and knew what was to be known. He became familiar with all things, saying that wisdom hung to him like a cloak. Obviously, this idea of wisdom and knowledge and being able to know things being very important here for describing Gilgamesh, and certainly important for Mesopotamian kings. They were supposed to have this kind of divine knowledge that they were working with. But going down, you have some more kind of functional purposes, talking about with Uruk that he made the walls, and the temple called Iana, which was the house of An, the sky god. So not only does he have kind of this expectations of knowledge, but he also has kind of this idea of defense, where he's supposed to build the walls to protect the city, as well as religious duties, right? We talked about in our activities and development of kingship how a lot of times this idea of religion getting tied to the position of kings is very important, and you see it right here with the Epic of Gilgamesh. Moving on, he is a hero. He is of Uruk. He is the budding bull. He leads the way. He the foremost. He also marches at the rear, a helper to his brothers. He is the great net protector of his men. With these words here, you can really get the idea and see the kind of military aspect of this, that the king's supposed to be a hero, a war leader, that he leads the way, but also marches at the rear to kind of help his soldiers and help his, it says here, help his brothers out. He's the great net protector of his men, but also kind of on the offense too. He destroys even stone walls, the offspring of Lukbala, which are kind of monsters. Gilgamesh is perfect in strength. So idea of a strong military leader, but a military leader who cares for his followers and cares for his men, is being brought to the forefront here. So I think that's another aspect of Mesopotamian kingship that they were supposed to be, Mesopotamian kings are supposed to be meeting. They're supposed to be wise, but at the same point in time, they're supposed to be strong and looking out for their men, building walls for their cities, and so forth. What about Hammurabi's law code? What do we see about expectations here? Hammurabi, the exalted prince who feared God, to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak. So this idea of a king as a lawgiver, that the gods are expecting the king to bring this kind of law and order to the land. But not just law and order, to make it prosper, as you can see right down here in the next, making riches to increase, enriching the poor, and doler lu, beyond compare. So trying to enrich the city and enrich the land and the kingdom as well. So bringing law and order and enriching it, another important aspect. Referring to Hammurabi as he who fixed the temple bounds of Kesh, who made rich the holy feasts of Nintu, the provident solicitous who provided food and drink for Lagash and Gursu, who provided large sacrificial offerings for the temple of Ningirusu. And these are all various religious rituals that the king is supposed to be filling. Sacrifices he's supposed to be making, holy feasts he's supposed to be presenting, and that you can see a very detailed tie-in here between a king's duties and responsibilities and his kind of religious functions as kind of the head of the religious order of the cities and of the towns. Another very important role that they're supposed to be fulfilling here. Once again, referring to Babylon as he who cared for its inhabitants and their need, provided a portion for them in Babylon in peace, a shepherd of the oppressed and of the slaves. who recognizes a god, essentially being a god here, who recognizes the right, who rules by law, the mighty monarch, the son of Babylon. So once more, this kind of legitimacy given to Hammurabi by the gods is tied to this idea of shepherding the oppressed and the slaves. And remember, even though the law code of Hammurabi wasn't entirely, it certainly made qualifications for different levels of status in society. If someone who was a slave did something and someone who was a noble did something, there was not going to be the same punishment, right? So it wasn't completely redressing social inequality, but it was at least giving some level of guidance and taking into some account the lives of those who are enslaved or people within society who don't have a whole lot. And this, interesting that this was also supposedly part of the king's job as well, to kind of try to bring some amount of equity to society. And of course, to the degree to they actually did this, I think it's very much up for debate. But it's interesting that that's entered in here as a potential responsibility as well. So what are some of the differences between Gilgamesh and Hammurabi? And a lot of people focused in on the idea of Gilgamesh being a little bit more of a mythical figure than Hammurabi, which is very, very, I think, legitimate. The fact that he's referred to here as the son of the revered cow, the woman Ramat Ninsun, so essentially a goddess. The fact that he was 2/3 god and 1/3 man, that he surpasses all others in strength. The form of his body no one can match, 11 cubits high, 9 spans his chest, so kind of this big, strong physical physique. Whereas most of the accolades for Hammurabi come from the fact that he's being pious, that he's being orderly, that he's kind of fulfilling kind of the sort of meat and potatoes functions that a king is supposed to be fulfilling, whereas Gilgamesh seems like he's sort of out there boasting a little bit more, sort of maybe fulfilling some more of the fun aspects of being a king, if you want to call it that, where he's going to war, he's going on adventures, he's building up his city. So a little more, I think, responsibility you see here reflected in Hammurabi, and it's of course the fact that Gilgamesh is a partially mythological figure. Hammurabi is certainly a historical figure. I think gives you a good perspective in this, how probably the everyday life of a lot of these Mesopotamian kings was not quite as glamorous as maybe Gilgamesh might be making it out to be, and was probably much closer to Hammurabi, where it was just kind of a series of various responsibilities that a king would have to appease the people, to appease the gods, to try to bring this kind of order and stability into their cities and into their societies. And I also, number 3 here, I thought this was a very, very interesting question that a lot of people took different ways. There wasn't a lot of direct evidence from the writings, even though some people certainly were welcome to, did an excellent job of taking a line here or a line there and saying, hey, this is like this modern ruler or leader, this is like this modern leader. But yeah, I mean, you could see people comparing the kings and the governing models of Mesopotamia and Hammurabi and Gilgamesh to U.S. presidents, both current and historic, to dictators around the world, to medieval kings, and I think that you really kind of see how impactful and similar sort of the governing systems that were developed at this point in time still are, even when those functions are being sometimes broken up into a much wider group of people and more of a democracy or a representative government, but you still kind of see signs of it and some of the same expectations as far as making a country or a kingdom or a city wealthy, making it prosperous, leading a military, caring for the soldiers. All of these things I think are still very much, kind of relevant and relatable to the way that we look at our leaders here today. All right, very good job, everyone, and I'm looking forward to reviewing our work for next week. Remember, if you have any questions on your grades or the primary source discussions or anything else, please let me know.